You have been a very long observer of the Aliyev family and their close ties to Moscow. Have you been surprised by his recent shift in tone?
Yes, to be very direct, very surprised at that.
Do you think that this could be a long-term realignment or maybe only a temporary recalibration?
I think it's temporary.
Hello and welcome to our reporting on issues of interest to the Caucasus region. I am Dr. Joanne Lasosky, journalism educator and author. And with me today is Ambassador Richard Kozlerich, former ambassador to Azerbaijan in the 1990s. He is also distinguished visiting professor in the Sklar School of Policy and Government at George Mason University. And welcome, Mr. Ambassador.
Thank you very much. Always good to join you.
So you have been a very long observer of the Aliyev family and their close ties to Moscow. So you have some insight in this. And of course, President Aliyev has in the past been openly critical of Western institutions and their actions. But as of late, have you been surprised by his recent shift in tone, embracing Western-led peace talks and seemingly distancing himself a little bit from Russia?
Yes, to be very direct, very surprised at that, because I had sensed up to this point, and it's been fairly long standing, that President Aliyev was unhappy with the West generally, certainly unhappy with France, but increasingly unhappy with the United States, particularly toward the end of the Biden administration. Now, the Trump administration is a different story, and he may be looking to Washington for a more friendly attitude toward Azerbaijan with President Trump. But notwithstanding that, I'm still trying to figure out exactly what caused this, at least public breakup with Moscow. I understand the still unanswered questions, not from the Azerbaijan side, but from the Russian side about the tragic Azov plane crash.
Right.
But that has been there, in the background for a long time. So what was the proximate cause recently for this? Perhaps it was the murder of the Azerbaijanis, two Azerbaijanis in Moscow, and what appears to be another period. It seems to come and go with the Russians, where they are, putting pressure on Azerbaijan citizens who live in Russia. But yeah, I still am if either surprised or mystified. I'm not sure what's the best word. Maybe both of them work as to where things are. Now, where does this go? Does this mean suddenly that there's going to be a dramatic shift, in terms of how Azerbaijan views its relationship with the United States? I'm not sure that's the case yet. I think it would take some other developments, and I think that, and maybe we'll get to this later in the discussion. I think all the excitement around this leasing of the Zangezur corridor has created expectations that somehow this was a U.S. initiative designed to increase U.S. influence at the time that Russia was having a declining period of influence, apparently. But all of this is just very complicated and mystifying.
Do you think that this could be a long-term realignment of Azerbaijan and the United States? Is this maybe a complete shift, or maybe only a temporary recalibration?
I think it's temporary. Okay. I don't see anything, as long as there are no changes inside Azerbaijan in terms of the current leadership. I don't see anything that would suddenly describe the relationship between Washington and Baku as a long-term strategic partnership. I just, I don't think that's going to happen.
However, I've just seen some video with President Trump hailing the progress of the peace talks between Armenia and Azerbaijan. How do you interpret this statement? What does it say about how maybe the U.S. is opening up a little bit more to the South Caucasus?
Well, if we saw the same video, it was the YouTube video of the Oval Office meeting with the NATO Secretary General. And, President Trump spoke at length. I mean, there was 35 minutes. I looked at the timer when I turned it on, and it was kind of free form. A little bit about everything.
Right.
He's looking to, and that, I don't think this is a secret or necessarily a bad thing. He wants to get a Nobel Peace Prize. He would like to get it for Middle East peace. I think that's a laudable objective to do it there. He has taken credit, and I will leave others to determine whether it's appropriate or not, for ending the very short conflict between India and Pakistan, credit for the agreement with the Congo and Rwanda, I think it was, over that long-standing civil war there. But in the context where he did mention the Azerbaijan-Armenia conflict, he also mentioned Egypt and Ethiopia and the conflict there over the new Renaissance Dam. Something I'm very familiar with because I spent 2 years in Ethiopia at the U.S. Embassy at the very beginning of it. So does this show, I still am looking for something that would demonstrate a direct U.S. engagement in the peace process. What we have seen in recent months, and I quite frankly like it better, are direct contacts between Armenia and Azerbaijan without mediators, whether Washington or Moscow or Minsk Group. I think it's a far healthier process than if it was taking place under the auspices of a mediation. So I think that part is good, but people are doing a lot of connecting of dots. You had this interview in Turkey with the American ambassador. Again, a very long interview, and at the end, he started talking about, leasing the Zangezur corridor under a 100-year lease. But I'm still waiting to see something more visible and more practical, where the United States is actually being involved with Armenia and with Azerbaijan in pushing the peace agreement forward.
Well, you have vast knowledge of both of these countries, and before I get to the Sunak and Zangezur region, I want to just see, how do you think if the U.S. was in charge of these peace talks, how would it be different than what it's been in the past, where, in other words, the Russians have been leading the peace talks? Would the U.S. maybe have a different strategy?
Well, it certainly would be a different strategy than Russia. Russia has its own objectives, and they're not good, for the South Caucasus. And I think, if the United States, if a Trump administration would be involved, there would be very much the idea of let's get a deal done fast. And let's make sure that, this is truly a peace agreement for which President Trump can take some credit in achieving that. But I think in terms of the outcome, which would be signing the peace agreement, which, by both Yerevan and Baku's own words, is close to being possible. that would be the major U.S. objective. Now, what happens the day after? And someone else had been using this vocabulary. I'm not smart enough to think it, but it's really a good way of thinking. Okay, great. United States, others get their wish. They sign a peace agreement. Well, now what? And I think that's where we would have to see what the future would look like under a Trump administration. I think it would be very heavy on U.S. Private sector involvement in some way in the region, in Armenia, in Azerbaijan, maybe even Georgia if things change there. I'm not sure how, and I think this is something that particularly in Azerbaijan people need to pay attention to, the influence of evangelical Christians in the White House might lead to pressure for the return of the people who left Karabakh at the end of the last fighting. I think, I'm not sure how that will play out, but there's a lot of I think there's a lot of talk among Armenian Americans about putting pressure on both Congress as well as the administration. So how I have no idea, how Trump would view that. I do not see the interest being in energy. This is not the 1990s. And you have an administration whose policy is U.S. energy dominance. And so the activity that, a Trump administration would press forward on is increasing U.S. oil and gas exports globally. And so not be a whole lot of interest in, supporting further development of energy in the Caspian region and Azerbaijan in particular. If companies would come in there, fine, but it's not the sort of thing that would be an area that would be promoted. What I would see is high tech, maybe interest in promoting that. Perhaps some interest in developing the middle corridor, though I think that's still again it remains to be seen how different the Trump approach would be on that from what the Biden administration was. But I would watch more for that than energy.
And energy would have been the initiative in the past.
Yes. Yeah.
So, Mr. Ambassador, you've already hinted at the potential 100-year lease for the corridor through Armenia's Sunak region and Zangezur. Yeah. What do you make of this proposal? How plausible is it?
Well, how plausible is it? Well, what are other examples? And I've been trying to do a little research on my own, just because, when I hear 100-year lease, I think of the Panama Canal, and that didn't necessarily turn out exactly the way the people who signed the 100-year lease 100 years ago thought it would. But if you kind of look around the world for other examples of either a single country, like in the Panama Canal, where the United States, was for that period responsible for the functioning of the canal, or Suez Canal could be another example. But these things kind of change over time, and what seemed like a good idea, may run into political realities on the ground, where you have a different government in either Armenia or Azerbaijan in 10, 15, 20 years down the road who decide to to go their own way. So I think if you're going to have a long-term lease like that, that does involve external parties. In other words, parties beyond Azerbaijan and Armenia. It would have to be a multinational consortium. And there have already been some hints that maybe Turkey is, helping the American ambassador there develop these ideas. I don't know if that's the case. It's kind of an odd thing for an American ambassador in Turkey to be talking about, but that's their business. But I think it would almost have to be like the pipeline consortia that have been put together for oil and gas in the region. But it would have to be more than just an American unilateral lease, if you will, for it to be accepted. Now, all of this ignores three very important issues, two of which happen to be countries, Iran and Russia. If they are not somehow part of this, I can't imagine a situation where they would simply step aside and let the United States and Turkey kind of develop this. So I think those are two very important wild cards. And the third thing is something that I've been very interested in because there's so little attention paid to it in all the discussion about the Middle Corridor and the fact that this Zangezur corridor would be part of a broader transportation link that would go basically from Turkey and beyond, all the way through Central Asia and beyond. People overlook the fact that there is an environmental crisis of huge proportions going on with the decrease in the levels of the Caspian Sea. And why is that important? Well, you can talk about a 100-year lease on the Zangezur corridor, but if you're not able, because the sea level in the Caspian is decreasing at a dramatic rate, if you're not able to move the amount of cargo that would be necessary from Kazakhstan and Turkmenistan to Azerbaijan to use the Zangezur corridor, I think you have a bigger problem out there that there needs to be, international attention. We've seen the Aral Sea. I was in Israel for 3 years, and one of the big issues there was flows from the Jordan River into the Dead Sea. And we understand how complicated, both from an environmental point of view, but also from an economic point of view, something like the decrease in levels of the Caspian can have. So I think that, and it's not a popular phrase, certainly with the Trump administration, about environmental problems that need to be addressed, but this is one that really does. This could benefit from U.S. leadership.
So are the Russians or the Turks looking at this issue of the lowering of the Caspian Sea? Are they attending to it?
No.
So nobody is really paying much attention to this climate issue.
There was, and I hope I've got the years right. My old mind isn't working as well as it should. I think it was 2018. There was an agreement among the 5 riparian states on the Caspian about a whole range of issues. The environmental issues relating to the Caspian in terms of pollution, development of energy resources, presence of military forces from outside the region of the Caspian. This agreement has never been ratified, as I understand it, by Iran. because Iran has never accepted the principle of a, if you will, an equal division of the Caspian among all 5 riparian states. So, what ought to have been a mechanism to begin addressing this has not worked, isn't working now. And so, it's a problem that is only going to get worse. It's only going to have greater impact on the economics and the geopolitics, quite frankly, of the region. And the 2 countries who should be as interested as anyone in dealing with this, Iran and Russia, in some respects are the source of the problem. Russians, because of what they've been doing in terms of mismanaging the water resources of the Volga, which have been the source of much of the water intake into the Caspian Sea, and the Iranians because of the geopolitics, where they simply have not been willing to accept, a division of the Caspian Sea that's recognized in virtually all the other states in the Caspian, but also principles of international law. So I think this is a problem that really, if you're going to address the Zangezur corridor in terms of U.S. engagement, U.S. policymakers need to ask themselves, what do we do about the Caspian Sea if unaddressed it results in sort of economic damage to this middle corridor connection.
So, speaking of Iran, Iran has voiced growing unease over Azerbaijan's expanding ties with Israel and Syria. Yeah. So from your perspective, Mr. Ambassador, how significant is Tehran's concerns, and could this escalate into a more open confrontation?
Well, this is not a new problem. I mean, Israel, from the time that I was in Baku when the first Israeli ambassador came, it was really quite a remarkable event. And the Iranians were extremely unhappy at that time. And the relationship between Azerbaijan and Israel has only grown over the years. Military connections, purchases of Israeli weapons systems by the Azerbaijani military, and the sale of Azerbaijani oil to Israel. I understand that if there isn't an agreement, there may be an agreement soon of SOCAR to be involved in the development of offshore oil and gas developments in offshore Israel. So this relationship has become closer and closer. And I think the risk, as you point out, of this, going south is very, very great. Whether it would be because somehow the Iranians believe that Azerbaijan was supporting Israeli attacks on Iran. This could happen. This misunderstanding, if you will, whether it was real or not, is something that could lead to conflict. So I think, this is not a stable relationship. It never has been. It's even less so now, and I'm talking about Iran and Azerbaijan. And Iran's concern about the corridor, they have been abundantly clear about nothing that Armenia and Azerbaijan would do that would change the border between Iran and those 2 countries. And they see a Zangezur corridor that would be managed by what even, Azerbaijan has talked about managing the corridor itself, which is a non-starter in Yerevan. But a 100-year lease to an outside party would be just, I think, run over that red line that the Iranians have been very clear about, not doing anything that would change the border relationship with Iran. So I think this is with all the problems and attention to Russia's relationship with Azerbaijan and Armenia, for that matter, I think we need to watch very carefully what Iran is up to and how they will react. I'm not sure that they are any more interested than Russia is right now in Armenia and Azerbaijan signing a peace agreement. So they're probably just as happy that nothing happened when the two leaders got together recently about the peace agreement.
Well, Mr. Ambassador, you've given us a great deal to think about, and I'm sure we will be back to talk to you again soon. I appreciate your insight so much. Thank you, Mr. Ambassador.